Thanks, Drew. This morning, we are pleased to be joined by Casey Butcher. Casey is a community organizer for POWER Interfaith in South Philadelphia and Center City. Casey has played an active role in many social justice campaigns, including the movement to ban fracking in New York State and in Occupy Wall Street. He'll be speaking on the history of Philadelphia's Chinatown and the current struggle to protect its integrity. Casey.
Thanks so much, Mike. And thanks for that lovely piano piece, Rollin. I really enjoyed that. It's such a pleasure to be with all of you. I know maybe about 10 people or so from the Ethical Society, but it's lovely to see so many new faces and names. My earliest ancestors to the United States were Sephardic Jews from Portugal, and they arrived in the late 17th century and founded the first synagogue in what today is the United States on the coast of Rhode Island. It's called the Toro Synagogue. It's still standing. You can see some of my ancestors' names on a plaque there, the Satius. And then they settled in New York City, and sometime around the very beginning of the 20th century, my paternal great-great-grandfather, Solomon de Vega, secularized, and he was a co-founder of the first ethical humanist society, the New York Society for Ethical Culture. So it's lovely kind of to be with you. My father was raised in the Unitarian Universalist Church by his mother, who's a descendant of these ethical society, secular Jews in New York City. My mom was raised Catholic in Iowa, on an Iowa farm, and they kind of split the difference, and they raised me in the Congregational Church, the UCC today. I myself, I work for POWER Interfaith. As many of you know, POWER Interfaith is the largest sort of faith-based and community of conscious sort of organizing outfit in the state of Pennsylvania. We have about 80 member congregations in 7 or 8 counties, mostly in central and southeastern Pennsylvania. Here in Philadelphia, POWER, as many of you already know, was founded about 12 years ago. You know, I would say that myself, and there's several of us on staff who aren't particularly religious, but we do see the value in engaging with faith-based organizations and, you know, communities of conscience like yourself, because it's, well, you know, we're an Alinskyite outfit. So this is where people gather outside of the home and outside of the workplace. They're institutions that tend to have not only strong community, but also some resources. And so you can think of this in the sort of school of resource mobilization. And, you know, I think POWER is going through a moment in its history right now where, after really focusing on some statewide campaigns over the last 5 or 6 years, there's a new mandate for us to really get good at local organizing. And looking at the landscape in Philadelphia, it actually seems a lot more propitious for the kinds of organizing work that POWER does than, say, Harrisburg. Even with the, you know, good election results in November of last year, it's still hard to get some progressive policies through the State House. However, as you all know, we have a very important election year this year in the city, where we'll decide the future government of our city, probably for the next 8 years. And so depending on who the new mayor is, depending on the makeup of the new city council, this will kind of determine the horizon of possibility for the kinds of work that we at POWER do. And it just so happens that in the context of this election year, there are 3 billionaire investors who've created a corporation called the 76 Development Corporation, and they have proposed to build a new stadium for the 76ers basketball team right at the heart of Center City. The site that they've chosen is between 10th and 11th Street on Market. It's where the current sort of failed project of the Fashion District is lying more or less vacant. But this site, as many of you know, is exactly 1 block away from the Friendship Arch on 10th Street in Chinatown. And there's a wealth of academic studies, there's a wealth of quantitative and qualitative research that shows that these stadium projects, far from being economic engines for the city and for the neighborhoods and where they're built, they actually have the exact opposite effect. They tend to economically depress the area around where the stadiums are built. And there's a variety of reasons why. One of the reasons why is that, for example, with this project in particular, if it, passes and they decide, and they do in fact start building the stadium, there's a 6-year construction phase. So the site at the heart of Center City will be a construction site for 6 years with particulate matter. It'll be dirty. It'll be filled with yellow machines. Traffic and parking will be made impossible in the immediate area. And so what happens during the construction phase is that all of the small businesses in the immediate vicinity close. So I don't know if you can imagine walking down 10th Street, on a Sunday afternoon right now. The hustle and bustle, there's Zoomers on dates and bubble tea, corner stores. There's old folks lined up for fresh produce at the groceries. There's 4 generations of people walking around. It's one of the most beautiful and sort of vibrant communities left in Center City. And all of a good portion of those businesses will close during the construction phase. And what, today is one of the largest sort of authentic Chinatowns left in the United States will be no more. So I think if there's one thing in this talk I really want to communicate and that I really want to land powerfully and clearly is that this stadium project represents an existential threat to Philadelphia's Chinatown. And so I want to talk about what Chinatown is. Many of you know this history, some of you may not. Philadelphia's Chinatown has been in existence for about 150 years. It is a space that is sacred for especially the Asian American communities who call it home. It's not just a home for Chinese anymore, although it was originally settled by mostly people from Canton province. Now there are folks from about a dozen South and Southeast Asian communities who have businesses there, who regularly go there. There is a K-8 charter school that the community created where Korean and Mandarin and a number of languages are taught. This neighborhood is one in which cultural practices and languages from a variety of home countries are kept alive right here in our city. There are about 5 Christian churches and 1 Buddhist temple in Chinatown, but privately within people's homes, a majority of homes would have a Taoist shrine where they honor ancestors and practice a Taoist sort of practice at home. And so this is a space, where Asian American communities have created commerce, where they've been excluded from other professions. They have raised families over many years, and it's where they've received immigrants, from their home countries and allowed them to become, fast track their way into becoming sort of members of our society. And so if you erase a Chinatown by building a stadium or a highway, you would disperse this community. And, in the context of the upcoming election, something that all of the politicians will be talking about is safety, because of the way that gun violence has skyrocketed, more or less, in the city. The numbers are up, right? People are concerned about safety. Most of the mayoral candidates will talk about this. Most of the city council races, this will be on the agenda. And I think it's important for us to point out that Chinatown is actually one of the safest communities in Philadelphia. It's one of the lowest incidences of gun violence. And so another message here that I think is important to communicate is that well-organized communities are safe, and that Chinatown is one of the best organized communities in the city. People will often belong to, as I've been listening and in conversations with many people in Chinatown over the last few months, you'll find out that people belong to 5 different associations. They'll belong to an association based on which province they're from. So, all of the people from Canton province, there's a Cantonese association. But then there's also associations based on last names. So all of the Chens, have an association. All the Lees, get together, bi-yearly. And then there's the professional associations. It's probably where restaurant workers are best organized in the city. It's a highly unionized space relative to other neighborhoods. And, this translates into a safer community. When you walk down the street in Chinatown, you'll see people bumping into each other, talking to each other. I lived in Latin America for about 10 years. It's this part of Philadelphia that feels most like Latin America. It feels most like the global South. And so, part of Chinatown's history, right, is one of facing from its very inception, really, but especially all throughout the 20th century, and especially since World War II, a series of development projects that threaten its very existence. So Chinatown is no stranger to these kinds of development projects. One of the reasons it's one of the largest remaining Chinatowns like it in the Northeast is because so many Chinatowns like it have already been targeted by developments of this sort. And so there's an interesting question as to why, a stadium project like this would even be proposed where it currently is being proposed. And I think that a large part of the answer actually has to do with anti-Asian racism and the specific way in which anti-Asian racism is baked into the United States common sense, almost imperceptibly, except for the folks on the receiving end of it. Because one of the ways in which anti-Asian racism plays out in the United States is precisely through the lens of quote unquote development, where regularly cities that try to develop themselves will do so by destroying their Chinatowns. They'll build a museum on top of the Chinatown. They'll build a highway through it. They'll build a stadium, as we saw in DC just, around 15 years ago. They built the Capital One Stadium in Washington, DC's Chinatown. And for those of us like myself, my father lives outside of DC. I remember the Chinatown before the stadium project. It was much like Philadelphia's Chinatown. It was vibrant. People lived there. There's 4 generations of people living there together. Now it's not a residential community. There might be a few restaurants left, but DC's Chinatown has been, by and large, erased. And that is what will happen here. And so I think that there's a number of things that Power Interfaith is working on as part of this fight. We were approached by the Save Chinatown Coalition. We were approached by the Asian Pacific Islander Political Alliance and Asian Americans United, and we are asked to help. And we were asked to help for the very specific reason that it has been hard for the coalition to receive audiences from City Council. So Power, who has been a part of many successful campaigns over the last decade in the city of Philadelphia, and who holds relationships with many council members, we've already begun the work of scheduling a number of research meetings with sitting city council people and folks who will be running for re-election in May. And we're heading into a season over the next 2 months where we should have more than a half a dozen of these. And, we'll find out, where people land on this. But in our most recent research meeting with Council Member Mark Squilla of District 1, who has sort of council prerogative to present the legislation that would provide the Development Corporation with the variances and other, legislation it needs in order to proceed. He will be the person who presents or not that legislation. And so right now, honestly, he's on the fence. He told us in our meeting that he's going to allow the process to play out, that he's listening to all sides. And so this is very much a fight that could still be lost. And it's no accident that the developers chose this year, or the end of last year really, but going into an election year, to present this project, because there's 3 billionaire investors, all of whom are real estate moguls. One of them is Edelman, who is responsible for University City in West Philadelphia, where I live. So the eastern portion of West Philadelphia, as you all know, has been massively gentrified. It used to be called the Black Bottom. And the last remaining sort of community that is sort of a holdover from Philadelphia's Black Bottom in the townhomes have all but been expelled already. There's only 11 of the 68 families that you see townhomes remaining, and they're holding out mostly to get further funds to be able to relocate felicitously. But Edelman's responsible for that. He's responsible for university cities all over the country, actually, over the last 40 years. His real estate investment firm focuses on university districts in particular. But they also like these sort of large-scale projects. And from the developer's perspective, this stadium represents a land grab, because the developers know that stadiums temporarily depress the areas around them. And they know that 3 years into construction, about halfway through the construction phase, the properties all around Chinatown in a couple block radius will be worth far less than they currently are. And so they'll be able to swoop in, purchase buildings, get themselves ready to redevelop as owners of the infrastructure surrounding the stadium site. So that right now, where you have a 100-year-old Chinese restaurant, you might have a Qdoba 10 years from now. This is the kind of stakes, that this project, I think, presents us. And so I think there's a handful of things right now that are really important. One is just to try to punt this into 2024, like delay this process so that it doesn't get approved this year. Because there's two things that make it more likely to pass this year than next. One is the fact that these three billionaire investors have super PACs and have a lot of money to offer the campaign coffers of the candidates right now, and they are already doing that. But the other thing is that a stadium project like this is attractive to the building trades. Now, we think it's attractive to the building trades for erroneous reasons, right? Like, the building trades don't exactly lack for work. They have plenty of work right now. They don't have a lot of members who are sitting without jobs. So what this does is actually relocate where the building trades will be working for the next 6 years. And they'll be doing it in a way that's destructive and harmful to our community. They won't be building things that maybe we would like to see being built. So it's a misallocation of human resources. But from within the building trades, they like a stadium project like this because it's a 6-year-long contract. Their members know that for the next 6 years, they'll have a steady income. And this means that most of the major unions will likely be on the wrong side of this. And there isn't a single person in Philadelphia government, who can afford to really forcefully go against the unions. So that's another thing we'll be working on. We're going to try to sit down with a number of these unions and have conversations with them. And all of these research meetings, whether with elected officials, with unions, with other groups that POWER sets up, we invite our coalition partners to the table with us. So residents of Chinatown, members of the Safe Chinatown Coalition, and the other organizations in Chinatown will be at the table with POWER, with members of your own congregation. Kate Esposito was with me at Mark Squilla when we spoke with Mark Squilla a week and change ago. But what we're hoping to learn is just how gung-ho, the unions will be in support of the stadium project, and to see if they can, listen to some of our arguments about why this is a terrible idea. And there are union members who reside and work in Chinatown. And so that will be an interesting sort of leveraging point, because these stadiums tend to be net job destroyers. The jobs they create are temporary for 6 years, but a lot of people who have work in the vicinity will lose work because of the dampening effect on the economy. I would also like to say that the other major stall tactic, right, our main stall tactic, like the main option we have right now, is that Squilla has agreed to that he will not present this legislation to City Council until an impact study has been performed. Now, those of you who've been around for a little while know that impact studies can often serve as mere window dressing in order to railroad a project through. They're not necessarily done very often in an honest, ethical, and scientific manner. And so the Save Chinatown Coalition has a technical commission. They've developed about a 20-page PDF that is a proposed impact statement that's much more comprehensive than the typical impact statements. They want the city to take into account impacts not only to things like the economy, to parking and transit, but also things like the cultural values that I started out speaking about when I, at the beginning of my talk, that this is a place where languages and cultures are kept alive, and what might the potential impacts of the city be on those. We need to sort of quantify for the city through a very well-performed impact statement and back it up with academic studies and scientific research, some of the information I've been sharing with you all anecdotally today. So this is as clear as day and backed by, a decent amount of research that this stadium is a terrible idea. We know that a scientific and honest impact statement will show very clearly that the stadium is not a good idea for the city. Now, of course, there's one other aspect of this, which is that the city recently spent about $1 billion at the Wells Fargo Stadium and the stadium vicinity to keep the 76ers in Philadelphia, who've been flirting with going to New Jersey. The city just spent a huge number of resources refurbishing the 76ers' current stadium. The current zoning in the city is very smart, obviously. We like having the 4 stadiums in South Philly surrounded by a sea of concrete where people can park, where there's already a public transportation hub so people can take public transportation when they want to go to a sporting event. If you have a project like this in the heart of Center City, there's a couple of interesting problems. One of which is that there's no longer any hospital capacity to support the kinds of accidents that tend to occur on game days or during a concert that might take place at this place. Where will people who, need medical attention go when there's a spike in people who need hospital care on game days? The other thing is that the project as it's currently proposed does not propose any new parking whatsoever. So the developers have promised the city and made a lot of public statements to the effect that have been making their way into the press, that the developers this will be a project that they're not asking for city funds to do, that the developers will use their own private capital to build this stadium. But that's not true, because all of the infrastructure in and around the stadium will be built and rebuilt using city funds. But also something like parking, which has not currently been considered in the current plan, will have to be built. And that means that another site beyond the current site will have to be chosen for demolition. There'll have to be parking put in there. We don't know if they're going to ask for subsidies for that. But there's a lot of at this phase of a construction project of this sort, there are all kinds of promises and claims made on the part of the development corporation that in the long haul turn out to be false. In my 20s, I lived in Brooklyn, New York, and I remember when this same debate was happening around the Brooklyn Nets stadium, and a lot of people worked pretty hard to stop that. But when it became clear that the stadium was being built, part of the community benefits agreement was that a large number, I can't remember how many units, but several hundred units of affordable housing were going to be built in the immediate vicinity. Well, by the time affordable got done being defined in committee, these were luxury condos that working people could not afford. And the neighborhood surrounding that stadium has been totally gentrified. It doesn't resemble in any way, shape, or form what that part of North Brooklyn looked like beforehand. So, I think that might be, more or less, the important things I wanted to share with you today. I want to share, just that, this neighborhood will not survive the construction of the stadium, that the stadium will be bad. It's a bad use of the city's resources. It represents underdevelopment of a racialized working class community, not development for our city. And, I think that there's a variety of other creative solutions that we could potentially, contribute to. For example, what could possibly be done to the existing infrastructure, this fashion district project has failed, but there's a building there, there's infrastructure there. How might the existing infrastructure be redesigned and repurposed? And this would represent a kind of green development. We won't be breathing in the particulate matter, won't have anywhere near the carbon footprint to refurbish the existing infrastructure for new purposes. What if there was a good amount of community listening so that we found out what Chinatown and the other neighboring communities would like to see this space used for? It could be more shops for Chinatown shopkeepers. It could be an educational or arts institute. There's a lot of things we can do with the current site and maybe offer an alternative vision as a movement to what could be done between 10th and 11th on Market Street that wouldn't destroy Philadelphia's Chinatown and that would, be a benefit to the city and to the communities.